Welcome to our program today, Mary Gaston, the Women's Movement, and Women in Modern Medicine. It's being presented to you by the Board of Trustees and Friends of Somerville Public Library and the Somerville Historic Advisory Committee. We originally planned this program for Women's History Month, but because of our current public health crisis, we've decided to run it in honor of the suffrage centennial, which is on August 26th this year. I'm your presenter, and I will be presenting the story of Mary Exton Gaston, MD. I'm Margaret Sullivan, and I'm a member of the Somerville Historic Advisory Committee. So this is Mary E. Gaston. She looked when she was 84 years of age. This portrait was painted by Edmund McGrath and commissioned by the Somerville Civic League. Until a few years ago, it hung continuously in the Somerville Public Library. It was on loan to the medical center for a few years and then returned to us quite recently. Somerville people that are familiar with Mary Gaston can tell you any one of the facts that you see on the screen there, that she founded the Civic League, that she was the first female physician in Somerset County, that she helped establish a community hospital, which is now a teaching hospital and major university affiliate, that she was a library benefactor in Somerville, and that she lived to be 100. Those are all interesting facts, but who was Mary Gaston really, and why are we caring about her this year especially? Well, if you think about the women's suffrage movement, and here you see on the left-hand side some major milestones in the women's suffrage movement, Mary's life really runs parallel to that trend in history. She was born in 1855 to a local lawyer. She arrived on this earth only a few years after the Seneca Falls Equal Rights Convention, and as education for women was starting to happen at the college level. Mary didn't actually attend public school in Somerville because the school opened for boys only. Her brothers both attended, but she would have been schooled at home or with a private tutor. In Somerville, there was an interesting development in regard to women's suffrage because Antoinette Brown Blackwell, who would later become the first woman ordained in a national church officially, was living in Somerville at that time, and she was an author, and at the time that she moved to Somerville, she published studies in general science. She was a neighbor of Mary's and had daughters her age. They probably knew each other. They lived just a couple blocks from one another. It's quite possible they shared the same tutor, and they certainly interacted with one another. Another influence of the early suffrage movement on Mary was probably Susan B. Anthony. The Brown Blackwells were suffrage supporters, and at their influence, they arranged for Susan B. Anthony to lecture at the Somerville Public Library as a fundraiser for the library in 1872. And no doubt, 17-year-old Mary attended that lecture and was likely influenced by Susan B. Anthony. A year later, she would head off to Dutchess County in New York to attend a prep school to get ready to attend Vassar. That was the same year that the Supreme Court upheld states' rights to bar married women from practicing law. So here's Mary Vassar in her college photo. She's 19 years old there. So you have an idea of young Mary versus the 84-year-old woman that we see most of the time. This is what Vassar looked like. This is the campus in the period that Mary would have been there, and a typical dorm room. These coming from the Vassar College archives, these photos. Here's a photograph of a class at Vassar, and unfortunately, I'm sort of blocking the most important part of the picture, but it's possible that one of these young ladies seated here may well be Mary. One of the influences in Mary's life that she encountered at Vassar was probably her first encounter with a female physician. This is the office of Dr. Helen Northrup, who was the Vassar College physician when Mary was enrolled there. Hygiene was a required course of Vassar freshmen, and it was taught by Dr. Northrup. There were other influences in Mary's life that would have encouraged her to be interested in the women's movement. We've already talked about Antoine Brown Blackwell, who's there furthest on the left, and Susan B. Anthony. The third woman you see is Louisa May Alcott, and we know that Louisa May Alcott lectured at Vassar College in the spring of the year that Mary was there, and that she attended the lecture and wrote home about it. Louisa May was, of course, the woman author and the first professional woman writer, essentially, in the United States. She was able to support herself with her writing. And her famous book, Little Women, is still read by girls today. And then finally on the far right is Dr. Alida Avery. Dr. Avery was Dr. Northrup's predecessor at Vassar as the college physician. And though she left Vassar as part of the faculty the year that Mary got there, the campus would have been buzzing that year because of her work. She published a study of Vassar College alumni that showed that higher education did not damage women either physically or mentally, which was then the argument against educating women at the college and professional levels. So as the women's suffrage movement rolled on, Mary continued to pursue her education. In 1888, she graduated from the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. In 89, she did her residency at Boston Hospital, and by 1890, the year that women had statewide suffrage for the first time in Wyoming, the first state, Dr. Mary Gaston opened her practice on High Street at age 35. She was one of the people instrumental in the creation of the Somerset Community Hospital, which opened its doors on East Main Street in 1900. And she worked there until 1908, when she was unfortunately required to close her practice and resign full-time from the hospital due to health issues. She had a heart attack. But she continued to lead an active life. While we don't know for sure whether Mary actively demonstrated or marched for women's suffrage, we know that in 1915, when New Jersey failed to pass the statewide suffrage referendum, Somerville was one of the towns where it passed. And I'd like to think that Mary had some hand in that. And then finally, in 1919, with the passage of the 19th Amendment and the final ratification of the required number of states, Mary Gaston founded the Civic League in Somerville. And it is not a coincidence that she founded the Civic League in conjunction with the 19th Amendment. She felt that the purpose and mission of the Civic League was to promote women's education and civic engagement. And she wrote that in an alumni survey that she completed and sent to Vassar Alumni Association. So that's in her own words. So we also have to realize that Mary practiced what she preached. She stayed engaged in a public health career even during her retirement. In 1914, she organized the Anti-Tuberculosis Society of Somerset County, and it was that league that purchased the first outdoor playground equipment for Somerville Public School. And you can see that amazing contraption in the picture there from the local newspaper. In 1917, she was instrumental in coordinating the U.S. World War I effort locally by organizing the Somerset chapter of the American Red Cross. And in 1918, at age 63, she came out of retirement to help the staff at the hospital during the great influenza epidemic. So I think Somerville can be very proud of Mary Gaston, and this year especially, we need to take note of that. Okay, for the next portion of our program, we've invited Dr. Kathleen Toomey to speak with us, and I'm going to turn that over to Kelly now.
Thanks, Marge, and Dr. Toomey, thank you so much for taking time today to join us. I will introduce you to our audience. Dr. Kathleen Toomey is a board-certified hematologist oncologist who served as the medical director of the Steeplechase Cancer Center at Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital, Somerset, since its opening in 2007. She is member of the Somerset Healthcare Foundation Board of Trustees. She is past president of the hospital's medical dental staff and a former member of its Board of Trustees. She has served as chairperson of the Medical Advisory of the Wellness Community of Central New Jersey. Dr. Toomey received her medical degree from the University of Bologna Medical School in Italy. Her medical training was completed in St. Peter's Medical Center in New Brunswick and the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey Rutgers Medical School. She is a member of the American Society of Clinical Oncologists. So thank you so much, Dr. Toomey. We really appreciate you joining us today. Marge and I have some questions that we would like to ask, and so I will start off. First off, Mary Gaston faced a lot of challenges in becoming a medical doctor. What were the challenges you faced in starting and continuing your own career? Do you see any similarities? How has medical training changed between your own experience and today?
So, thanks to Marge and thanks to that wonderful history of Mary Gaston and I guess the suffragette movement. And, we can look at that as, the beginning certainly of the feminist movement. When you talked about, boys only going to schools, it reminded me that my mother was a teacher, and so education was very important. And so when I went to a high school, I went to the only specialized high school in New York that took women, and that was Bronx Science, High School of Science. My brother went to Brooklyn Tech. Stuyvesant didn't take women. I lived in Queens, and I traveled by bus and subway 2 hours each way to go to high school. So, you think that's the beginning of it, really. So things have changed. And, one of the things that I loved to do when I was in grammar school was play basketball. And when I got to high school, there was a boys' team, but there certainly wasn't a girls' team at that high school. I actually wanted to go to one of the Catholic high schools to play with my friends. My mother was having none of it. So it's thanks to her, I think, that, she knew. And she was an early feminist. So it was really, a woman who raised 7 children and then went to school and taught and got her degree, going to school at night. She was amazing. So for her children, she made sure that we got our education. I went to a state university of New York at Stony Brook, and I was able to put myself through school because my father was a policeman in New York, my mother was a teacher, 7 children. There wasn't any money that they were going to be able to put us through school. But, the good thing for us was that we could do it in those days. And today, the kids, it's really very, very tough. It's so expensive. And then I thought I was going to go into biochemistry research and found out about going to medical school in Italy. And once again, it didn't cost anything. So it was I could make enough money in the summer to pay my flight to Italy, each year, a couple of $100 back in the day, and have enough money to live for the year. But the school itself really was free. So I was able to get a medical degree. And at that time, when I came out, it was not that I had a lot of role models, right? There were not a lot of women. So, right? So in 1950, 6% of physicians were women. It's up to 36% now. But if you look at women under the age of 35 who are physicians, if you look at physicians under the age of 35, 60% of them are women. So women are coming on. Women are coming on. So it's, we don't know, when we live through history, we actually don't know we're living through history. We're just living. Right? So Gaston was one of the 4 physicians that founded Somerset Medical Center, Robert Wood Johnson Somerset now, and 100 years for there to become a woman president of the medical dental staff. And then, I was the first, not the last, and the reason I did it is kind of interesting, because I've been on the board of the hospital, I had been in the credentials committees and the chair of the institutional review board and all of that. But some of my colleagues were, asking me to do this, and I did it because there had to be a first woman. I did it because it would be something my mother would have wanted me to do, right? To show women that you can do it, that you can, you can lean in, and you can, if somebody asks you to do something, it's okay to say yes. Go ahead, try it. What do you have to lose? So, and it actually was a wonderful experience for me, and it's a long process. It's many years on the medical executive committee, and it's lots of work, but really was a good experience. And then, several years later, Dr. Betty Katniss followed me. So I was happy to be the first of that. And then when that happened, I looked back at my career and I said, oh, wait a minute, I've done this before. I hadn't realized it, but so in Italy, in Bologna, there was a group called the American Medical Students in Bologna, a group of 800 people, including the veterinary students and the medical students, and I was the first woman president of that group as well. So, you just sort of fall into it. You don't realize what you're doing, but you just sort of fall into it. And once again, we need to remember to be mentors and be mentors to the next generation and to keep going.
That's great.
So, so that's sort of where I've been.
Mm-hmm. So if you and Dr. Gaston could meet today and visit each other's hospitals, there would be vast differences, of course. If Dr. Gaston gave you a tour of her hospital, what would you most want to see? And if you could take her on a tour of the hospital today, what would you show her first?
So I think from a woman's physician point of view, we would be interested in the patients. So we would go to the wards. We would see the patients. Now, back in her day, I'm sure the wards were, who knows? I think there were only probably 14 beds or something like that at the hospital. The hospital was small. And I actually look at the hospital out of my window at the Steeplechase Cancer Center. I look to Main Street and I can see the original hospital. And it's nice to point out to people that is the original hospital. And I love the whole idea of the history of it. So I want to see what she does. I would want to see where the patients were, and that's what I bring her oncologist to the Nardoni Pavilion at Robert Wood Somerset, and show her where our patients are and what kind of rooms they have and how we work, and realizing that to be a physician, all we have to give our patients is information. Right? So whatever information she had back then, whatever information we have now, whatever information is going to be available 100 years from now, it's our job. It's what we do. We just give patient's information. So, yeah, I'm sure we would be talking clinical. It would be patients.
Dr. Toomey, your specialty is oncology.
Yeah.
Diagnosis and treatment of cancer was primitive when Dr. Gaston was practicing. What led you to choose your specialty?
So that's always a good question, right? How do you choose what you're going to do? So we say what we don't want to do. So the first thing would be, I didn't want to be a surgeon. I wanted to talk to people. I didn't want to take care, and listen, women in surgery, that's that's another level of toughness. So I knew that I wanted to be in a field that was more talking to patients and that kind of, more relational. And then you choose pediatrics or adult, right? So I knew I wanted adult. I didn't want necessarily to go to pediatrics. And then you do your postgraduate training in internal medicine. And what happened, so it's another interesting, so I call myself the grandmother of oncology from New Brunswick because St. Peter's was the place where the first oncology unit was started in the area. And so I was working with one of my mentors, Dr. Martin Cosman, and Dr. Cosman started the oncology unit, but he actually was a hematologist and not an oncologist. And I was a fellow in hematology and oncology, so he had me certify the first 5 nurses to give chemotherapy at the hospital. So I always say, I certified the first 5 nurses who certified every other nurse after that. So that was the first oncology unit. And so really I went into, well, the truth be told, I thought I might want to be an ICU doctor or a primary care doctor, but my husband wasn't finished with, he helped put me through medical school, and then it was his turn to go back to school to get his PhD in physics from Rutgers. And so I said, okay, I have to stay and do some training. And once again, having a mentor who I liked, Dr. Cosman, so we worked together, and he, as I said, started the oncology unit and gave me lots of opportunity. And I, once again fell in love with oncology because oncology is a relatively new field. Oncology started after World War II with chemotherapy and those kinds of things. So you don't, once again, when you're going through something, you don't realize that it's history, right? It doesn't become history till later. So, I can see now from when I started to where I am now, the changes in oncology and the number, when I started, we were curing 48% of patients. We're now above 70% of patients. We have many more survivors. People are living longer. I was there in the days when people weren't even told they had cancer, right? Or they shut the doors. So we were very happy to have an oncology unit because that meant that those patients were getting specialized care, and that was moving that ball down the field to help people with cancer take care of their pain, take care of their psychological problems, take care of their cancers. So, things have changed, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be able to see the change that's happened.
Amen to that.
Yep.
So you've sort of alluded to it a couple times already, but how has time and history changed how women physicians are perceived, both inside the profession and to ordinary folks like us?
So obviously, Mary Gaston's time, and before her time, Elizabeth Blackwell being the first female physician in this country, when looking at the history for this talk, I've came to find out that Elizabeth Blackwell, it was in 1848, I think, 49, she graduated from Geneva College, and at that time it was a 2-year program. She had to go to Europe, like I had to go to Europe. She had to go to Europe to get her training because she couldn't find training in the U.S. And then women after that, then she set up the New York Infirmary to set up training for women, other women going through medical school here. But the interesting thing was that the medical school asked the men in the medical school to vote her in or not. And the guys did it as a joke. So the school thought that they weren't going to allow her to come in, but the students did it as a joke, and that's how she got into the Geneva College. I mean, these things happened. These things are, these things are real. So I don't know. Okay, something here. I don't know. Things slowly change, right? There's still some attitudes out there that make it difficult, and things slowly change. But when I first started, I'd walk down the hall and the patients would say, "Nurse, nurse," and I wouldn't turn around and they get mad at me. But if they were sick in the middle of the night, it didn't matter who I was or what I was. If I was taking care of them, I was the doctor, and that was okay. So they might be muttering under their breath in the middle, as I was making rounds in the intensive care unit, but at night when they went into congestive heart failure and I was there, it was fine. I was doctor. So, and I think in general from patients, it's been pretty good. It's just been the periphery, going to the emergency room and having the intern be called doctor and me not, It's like, okay. I was his boss, but that's okay.
Having worked in the pediatric setting, I had the impression that men and women were equally represented in pediatrics. Is it the case that men still predominate in certain medical fields? Is that changing at all?
So it is changing, and so, for example, pediatrics is probably mostly women. Even more so is OBGYN, right? So OBGYN, there are very few male trainees anymore. Most of the trainees programs will be mostly women. And actually, OBGYN is the only field where women get paid more than men. So every other field of medicine, on average, women are paid less. Certainly things are changing, and discrimination based on gender still, especially wage discrimination, those kinds of things still exist, but women do things differently. We don't negotiate very well. We don't have the innate ability to negotiate. When somebody asks us if we can do a job, we say thank you. Men say yes, and this is what I want. So teaching women how to negotiate. There's a book by two PhD psychologists called Women Don't Ask. And so for my junior women, I've often suggested that when they went out looking for a job, and some of them have come back to me and said, I got more this, I got more vacation, I got more money, I got more whatever, but learning that it's okay to ask, I think is very important. So surgical subspecialty, so, seeing more women, for example, in urology, important. Half the people are women, so having positions that look like you is important. The same is true for minorities. Having a doctor that is Hispanic or is Black, so much better for patients to be able to see that. So I think things are changing, but at the top levels, you got to be upfront. You got to be, I'm here, and you better listen to me because I have something to say.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
And on continuing on that vein, what other types of advice would you offer to any young women who are thinking about a career in medicine going forward, either in terms of education or kinds of life skills that you just mentioned?
Yeah, so I think from an educational point of view, look for your opportunities. So when somebody says, "Will you do a webinar?" you say yes. When somebody says, "Would you speak to this group?" you say yes. Take the opportunity, that are offered to you. Don't back off from it. Take the responsibility, whatever the jobs are that are available. look at your community, look at what's available in terms of volunteering. So, I'm on the board of the Cancer Support Community, which was the wellness community. I'm on the professional advisory board of Sister to Sister, which is an African American support group for women with breast cancer, because breast cancer is my area of interest. So look for those opportunities. Look at your community. See where you can help, and you get so many people that you can meet and that can help you. And I think it's important to look for mentors. I think and ask, what should I do? As I said, I like when somebody's going for a job, I like to give them advice about, go ahead and ask for something. Don't sit back and say thank you very much. Women should know that in general, they're very good doctors. They tend to listen to their patients. They tend to spend more time with their patients. They pay more attention to details. There are studies showing that mortality is less with women physicians. So not a lot less. And we're not trying to be anti-men. We want our men to do as good as we do. And we want to keep telling them, you have to do as good as we do. So, that's be there, be present, speak up, don't be afraid.
And do you think there's a need that they have to commit to this early, or is this something that they can, have an epiphany about and go on? I mean, Mary didn't become a doctor until she was 35, although she had a real uphill haul. Does this have to be an early life decision?
So it doesn't have to be, but, certainly it's probably, better for people if they start early, if they at least see role models that they can model themselves after. Because, but it could happen at any time. 35, yes, it took her a little bit longer. I was an intern at 30. Because medical school in Italy is 6 years instead of 4 years. So but in the time I came back, it was another year. I did some externships.
And was it in English? Excuse me, was it in English? Yeah, I meant to ask you that.
No.
You had to do it
I learned Italian. But I live with Italians. I'm fairly fluent, and I now have patients who come to me because I speak Italian. And I took Russian in high school and college, so it was a whole other language that I took in high school and college. So I would say we really need to, as much as possible, model ourselves so that young women can see that it's okay to speak up. It's okay to be on the board of the hospital. It's okay to be the president of the medical dental staff. It's a good thing. It's helpful. Because unless we ask, nobody's going to give it to us. We've got to keep asking.
Okay. Well, we asked you, Dr. Toomey, and you said yes. And we want to thank you for that. And so we're going to get this to you. This is an Images of America Somerville that our historic advisory group did when this was just getting started a long time ago.
Wonderful.
It's out of print now, but we reserve a few copies to give to special guests now and then. And so this one is going to come to you. And what's really cool about it is it has a whole section called In Case of Emergency, and there are all wonderful pictures of the Somerset Hospital that
Mary
founded.
So back in, we originally were going to have this program back in March, and unfortunately COVID happened, and originally we had a bookmark contest. So we sponsored a March is Women's History Month, and went to local schools and had a bookmark contest, which was sponsored by the trustees of the Somerville Library and Friends of the Somerville Public Library. Special thanks to Fulton Bank for providing prize money to the winners. So I am very happy to announce the winners of the bookmark contest for Women's History Month. The runners-up are Juliana G.H., Lucy O., Olivia L., Samantha P., and the first place grand prize winner is Melia B. So congratulations to the winners. We'd like to say that the awards and the prizes will be awarded to the children once the schools have reopened. So congratulations to all the winners. And Dr. Toomey, I believe we were going to also present to you a bookmark as well.
So that concludes our program. Thank you again, Dr. Toomey, for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Toomey. It's been a real pleasure to hear about your experiences. Thanks for sharing with us.
You're welcome.